On March 11th, 2011, a truly massive force of nature slammed into human technology, and that collision triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. We're going to walk through the story of the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Disaster, and it's a powerful reminder of how just one event can set off a devastating domino effect. So, if you want to understand what went so wrong, it really all starts right here. The plant was built to be protected by a seawall designed for waves up to 6 meters high. But the reality it faced that day, a tsunami that was over 14 meters tall. Right from the very start, the plant's defenses were, well, literally and figuratively underwater. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll trace the whole thing through 4 key moments. First, that initial collision of the earthquake and tsunami. Then, we'll get into the critical failure they call the station blackout. From there, we'll look at the meltdowns and explosions, and finally, we'll examine the long shadow this event still casts today. So let's start at the beginning, with the immense, totally uncontrollable forces of nature that kicked this whole crisis into motion. It all began with this one number, 9.0. At 2:46 in the afternoon local time, the Tohoku earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. And look, this wasn't just some strong quake, it was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. It violently shook the entire country. But the earthquake itself, that was just the opening act. What's really shocking is just how fast everything happened. At 2:46 p.m., the earthquake hits. Just 1 minute later, the reactors do a perfect automatic shutdown, exactly like they're supposed to. For a moment there, it probably seemed like the safety systems had worked. But then, at 3:35 p.m., the tsunami arrives. And just 6 minutes after that, the entire plant loses all power. In less than an hour, a controlled emergency had spiraled into a full-blown, unprecedented crisis. And that total loss of power, that brings us to the single most critical failure in the entire disaster, the station blackout. This is the exact moment that the natural disaster became a technological one. So what in the world is a station blackout? Well, it's pretty much one of the most dangerous things that can happen at a nuclear plant. It means a complete loss of power. Not just from the main power grid, which the earthquake had already taken out, but also from the on-site emergency backup generators, the very last line of defense. And this is that domino effect I was talking about, playing out in real time. First, the tsunami floods the plant and knocks out those emergency generators. Without the generators, the electric pumps stop working. Without the pumps, the cooling water that is absolutely vital stops flowing to the reactors. And without that water, the nuclear fuel, which is still incredibly hot even after a shutdown, it just starts to overheat, dangerously. The loss of cooling kicked off the most terrifying phase of the disaster. With temperatures inside the reactors just soaring out of control, the engineers were suddenly in a desperate race against a nuclear meltdown. A nuclear meltdown is, well, it's pretty much as bad as it sounds. It's when the fuel rods get so intensely hot that they literally begin to melt. That molten material can then burn right through the containment structures, releasing highly radioactive materials. It is the ultimate failure of a reactor's safety systems. And at Fukushima Daiichi, this wasn't just some isolated incident in a single reactor. No, it happened in 3 of them. Units 1, 2, and 3 all experienced full meltdowns. This turned a single crisis into this complex, multi-front battle against a nuclear catastrophe. As all that fuel was melting, it created a huge buildup of hydrogen gas. And that is what led to those shocking images the whole world saw on the news, these powerful hydrogen explosions that just blew the reactor buildings for Units 1 and 3 to pieces. Now, this is a really crucial point. What you saw exploding wasn't the nuclear core itself, but the buildings that housed them, getting ripped apart by this secondary chemical reaction. As the situation got worse and radioactive materials started leaking out, the Japanese government had to order a mass evacuation. In the end, more than 150,000 people living within a 20-kilometer radius of the plant were forced to leave their homes. And so many of them had no idea if they would ever be able to go back. So the immediate crisis was eventually brought under some control. But the disaster cast a very, very long shadow. And its consequences are still being felt today, not just in Japan, but all around the globe. Of course, people immediately started making comparisons to Chernobyl. And it makes sense. Both were rated level 7, which is the highest possible severity. But it's really important to know the key differences. Chernobyl was caused by human error and a deeply flawed reactor design, which led to a massive release of radiation into the atmosphere. Fukushima, on the other hand, was triggered by a natural disaster, and while the radioactive release was incredibly serious, it was significantly less than Chernobyl. The aftermath has been just monumental. It kicked off one of the largest and most expensive cleanup operations in human history, a job that's expected to take another 30 to 40 years to finish. The disaster also forced a global conversation about nuclear energy safety. It led Japan to shut down almost all of its reactors for a time, and it made other countries completely reconsider their own nuclear programs. But the true cost, you can't measure that in dollars or decades. It's measured in lives. For hundreds of thousands of people, this wasn't just a nuclear accident. It was the permanent loss of their homes, their jobs, their entire communities, really a piece of their identity. And that is why this all matters. So the key takeaway here is a really powerful one. The Fukushima disaster is this stark reminder of just how fragile the line is between our own technological ambitions and the incredible, unpredictable power of nature. It leaves us with a critical question. In a world with increasingly extreme events, are we really preparing for the disasters we expect, or are we preparing for the ones that defy our imagination?